Before I really get into a few of the basic logical relationships, and these logical relationships you will understand, you'll know them intuitively. I'm not going to use a bunch of philosophical language that's hard to understand. And I think when you see how commonsensical they are, you'll wonder what the big deal is, why this is such a hard idea for people to accept. But before I discuss those, I want to talk about the difference between the concepts of possibility, plausibility, and probability. And the reason I have to do that is because, number one, many people think those three things are the same. So sometimes you will hear people say possibility, plausibility, or probability, and they'll use them interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. And the other reason is because when we're talking about logic, we talk about logical possibilities. What is logically possible in the world? And the thing is, what is logically possible in the world is not what you would expect. It is actually counterintuitive unless you understand the distinction that I'm making. It's important to understand the difference between what is logically possible and what is actually possible. A statement or an idea is logically possible if it doesn't contain within itself any sort of contradictions. If a statement doesn't imply or contain any contradictions, then it's logically possible. Now you might think, okay, that seems like common sense, so what? But here's the thing. If I said, it's possible I can jump to the moon, right? If I tried to tell you today, I can jump to the moon, your immediate response would be, that's impossible. No, you can't, that's impossible. And you would be right and you would be wrong, depending on which kind of possibility we're discussing. You are correct. It's actually impossible that I jump to the moon, right? That's kind of ridiculous. But it's not logically impossible. There's nothing in that statement that's contradictory. I can jump to the moon. So think about this. It might one day be possible that I can jump to the moon. Maybe they have some cool ass boots or something that'll get you to jump that high, or maybe we take some crazy steroids, or maybe something about the universe changes. We don't know what the future might bring, where it might be actually possible that I jump to the moon. It was always logically possible, because when we're talking about logic, all we're talking about is the statement, the words being said. Is there any contradiction in those words that I said? There's not. So it's logically possible. But sometimes we get tripped up because we're imagining it, we're thinking about it, and we're thinking about the laws of physics, for example. We're thinking about the laws of gravity, for example. And so we're like, nah, that's not possible. But there's a difference between what's actually possible and what's logically possible. And when we're talking about logic, we're talking about what's logically possible. This will make sense as we go on. So now let me say something about possibility, probability, and plausibility. Possibility is anything that doesn't have a logical contradiction, anything that doesn't have a self-contradiction within it. Plausibility is different. Plausibility is Plausibility. Plausibility. You might hear this in legal jargon. You might hear this if you're in the law library reading about criminal cases or whatever. Something is plausible if it's very likely to be true, given the evidence that we currently have. Right? So something is plausible if it's very likely to be true, given the evidence that we currently have. So you can think about this in a criminal court case. Let's say in a criminal court case, someone is trying to make a judgment about the situation too fast. Not all of the evidence is in. But what the conclusion they've drawn is wrong, but it's plausible. All right? So let's say they believe Joe committed a crime. They believe Joe committed a crime because they caught him on surveillance footage in the area at the time. No one else was in the area at the time. So they then conclude that Joe is guilty of this crime. It might, in fact, be false that Joe is guilty. It might be the case someone else committed this crime. But because they don't have all the evidence yet, they just assume Joe committed the crime. And because they have good pieces of evidence, it might be plausible that Joe committed the crime. So given what evidence we currently have about a situation, we can make a conclusion that is plausible. Another example would be, I believe that my car is parked outside in the driveway. I have the keys in the house, and I remember parking it in the driveway. So my two pieces of evidence are possession of the car keys, and I remember parking it in the driveway. But it might not actually be there. The truth might be someone stole it, right? But if you ask me right now where my car is and I said it's in the driveway because I've got the keys and I remember doing it, I've given you a plausible explanation about where my car is. Because based on the current evidence I have, I think it's in the driveway. That makes sense. But it might actually be false. So logical possibilities are anything that doesn't imply a contradiction in the words. Actual possibilities have to do with what we know about the laws of nature. Plausibility is the likelihood of something being true or happening based on the evidence we currently have. Now, probability is just the likelihood of a given occurrence or event. So when somebody says there's a 98% chance that it's going to rain tomorrow, then saying there's a percent is like saying there's a probability. There's a 98% probability. It is very likely that it's going to rain tomorrow. It doesn't mean it will rain tomorrow. It just means it's very, very likely that it will rain tomorrow. So probability can be ranked, in percentages, like there's a 1% chance or a 2% chance or a 50% chance, which is different from things like plausibility and possibility. So these terms will become a little bit clearer as I go and I explain some examples, but just keep in mind that the words possibility, plausibility, and probability are not the same thing.